Richards was outwardly a real success story, but the night he accounted for Aussie Stewart in this fight, he was also fighting a losing battle against booze and depression. Ironically, two of his best performances came in defeats. In 1940 against this man, Archie Moore, one of the greatest boxers ever. World champions dodged Moore for years, and it wasn't until he was nearly 40 that he finally got a shot at the world light heavyweight title and won. Meanwhile, Henneberry had moved to New York and fought a draw at Madison Square Garden with the world's number 3 middleweight Georgie Abrams, a fighter who would later match it with Sugar Ray Robinson. But Henneberry will always be remembered for his battles with Ron Richards. Fred returned home, and appropriately his last fight was against his arch-rival. True to form, Fred was disqualified. Fiery Fred won 60 out of 85 fights, 31 by KO. He was always in superb condition, he never smoked, and despite running pubs, never touched a drop. Sadly, it was the opposite for Ron Richards. Once his career was over, drink got the better of him, and many times he was bashed by thugs eager to say they had beaten a legend. In 1967, shortly before his death, he visited Sydney Stadium for one last look, and ring announcer Ray Connolly remembers the occasion well.
Of all the fights and all of the personalities that I'd been given to introduce, there was never one that exceeded the response the crowd gave to Ron Richards. We came down in a three-piece striped blue suit, and when I introduced him, he came through the ranks. As one, they rose.
Not long after, Richards died of a heart attack, and Fred Henneberry, Jimmy Carruthers, George Barnes and Vic Patrick were among Richards' pallbearers. Ron Richards was the first great champion trained by Ian McQuillan, who turned out 60 Australian title holders during a career that lasted half a century.
The happiest moment in my career was when Vic Patrick won the lightweight title.
At the height of World War II, Vic Patrick, born Victor Patrick Luca into a large Italian family, was transformed by Ian McQuillan from an ungainly southpaw into a knockout machine with an Irish-Australian name. Patrick was born in 1920 in the Hawkesbury area north of Sydney and grew up working his old man's oyster leases. It was tough work. At the age of 18, he moved in with his sister at the inner Sydney suburb of Newtown. Patrick first rose to prominence in 1941 when he took on America's former world champ Todd Morgan here for the Australian Lightweight Championship, taking the title by a 15-round decision.
He was as common as a fox, and he used to talk to you. He used to say, "Hey, what are you doing? You hit me low, don't hit me low, shake hands," and all this sort of stuff, you know. And when you stopped to shake hands, he'd job you. And he broke my nose in that fight, and I fought all the way through it with a broken nose, so I never stopped.
Throughout Patrick's career, he had to fight bigger men simply to get bouts. Two bigger blokes he belted were these two, Fancy Dan, blonde boxer Hockey Vanell, and his opponent Ron McLaughlin, who Patrick beat for the Australian welterweight title in 1942. But bigger fights loomed for the people of Australia. Japan's bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941 catapulted America into the war. Only months later, a Japanese air raid on Darwin brought the fighting to our mainland. New Guinea was also under siege, and Australian troops fought fiercely along the vital Kokoda Trail. In November, the diggers bravely wore down the enemy. Title bouts were curtailed due to the war effort, and on many occasions, fights involving the Allied services took their place. Former top rugby league prop Ray Steer, who was often sent from the field for foul play, was a more than capable boxer, or should I say brawler, as he showed in this clash with Man Mountain Les McNabb. During the war, a host of stars arrived in Australia to entertain the troops. Among the visitors, Bob Hope.
I think I could take it. No, you see, you have to forget all about fear.
Well, that's for me.
You have to forget all about comfort.
That's for me.
You have to forget all about women.
That's for them. Say,
Rising to the top at the same time as Vic Patrick was a young man who hailed from the New South Wales north coast town of Mullumbimby. He was born Geoffrey Murphy, but took the name of the old heavyweight champ Tommy Burns. As a hungry kid looking to build up his physique, he wasn't a natural fighter, but his trainer converted him.
He said, I don't want to fight, I don't like fighting, which I didn't. I just liked it. Even at school, when there was a fight on, I used to shoot through and get away from it. I never liked violence of any kind, honestly. And I didn't like fighting. So in the next breath I said, how much do they get for a fight?
Like it or loathe it, boxing made Burns rich and famous in the 1940s.
girls, girls, girls. We're just surrounded with them. And believe me, we like it.
By 1941, Burns had recorded a succession of impressive victories that saw him come to Sydney. He was a good-looking hero who kept throwing punches and would never quit. Burns would eventually be matched with Vic Patrick in a fight that remains a classic. Meanwhile, Patrick had joined the Australian Army Service Corps and was able to take time off for boxing. In town was Vic Calto. Calto was thick-set with huge shoulders and a massive chest. But when it came to power, Patrick had all the muscle. The rugged Kiwi lost twice to Patrick, but made Vic earn his money. Also in Australia were other top-line boxing celebrities. Gene Tunney, the former world heavyweight champ. And Jack Dempsey, Tunney's great old rival, paid a visit to the Melbourne Zoo. May 7, 1945, and peace came to a battered Europe. The Allied invasion finally ended Hitler's dream of European conquest. Germany surrendered, and 3 months later, the atomic bombing of Japan by the Americans saw the unconditional surrender of the Japanese and the end of the war in the Pacific. Crowds went wild in cities and towns across Australia and New Zealand to celebrate victory. People partied night and day. On a sad note, the man who had guided Australia through the tough times of the war, Prime Minister John Curtin, passed away only a month earlier. With the war behind us, the shift in the social climate was towards more carefree pursuits. There was a new dance craze, the jitterbug. On the radio, there were new appealing romance programs like this one, sponsored by Mortine Insect Spray.
Presenting Chapter 1 of When a Girl Marries, dedicated to those who are in love and to all those who can remember.
It had a huge following. Boxing was as popular as ever, particularly at the police boys' clubs. Even entertainers such as comedian Roy Reen Moe got into the ring as a referee of sorts. By 1946, both Tommy Burns and Vic Patrick were hugely popular. Stadiums Limited worried that a fight between these two stars would kill off a draw card. But such was the public clamour for the fight, they were eventually to square off on February the 2nd in one of the most eagerly awaited battles at the Sydney Stadium since Jack Johnson took on the original Tommy Burns in the days before the old barn even had a roof. Crowds began queuing hours before the action was due to begin to see what was being touted as a fight no one would ever forget.
The people was at the stadium on the Friday afternoon at 3:30 looking for tickets to get in, lining up to get in, so to get good seats up on the bleachers and whatever.
14,000 packed the stadium. Scalpers sold ringside seats for as much as £10, and 5,000 who couldn't get in sat outside in the park and listened to progress updates on Radio 2UE with Cliff Carey.
And up they come for round one. And Burns gets his long-awaited chance at tilted Vic Patrick's title.
The bout began in predictable fashion with neither man willing to take chances. In round 2, Burns was momentarily on the canvas, not dazed, but certainly shocked. He told his cornerman Jack Dunleavy not to be alarmed because he had a plan to beat the champion. But the plan wasn't working. Patrick continued to land with both hands. In round 7, Burns scored heavily and the crowd sensed a kill.
He comes in, a hard right sends Patrick up against the ropes. Patrick in trouble as Burns lands a perfect right onto the chin and then swings a left and right up to the side of the head. Patrick trying to punch, but he's tired and weary now. With Burns after his man, Patrick jabs a right hand that gets him out of trouble momentarily, but Burns forces him over to the ropes. Punching away freely and getting back to mid-ring, Burns brings the left up to the side of the head. A hard left swung by Burns, misses Patrick. Burns now and Patrick are in a clinch. Burns pushes Patrick off the clinch, and Burns is within an ace of winning the title. A hard right to Patrick's head still has Patrick in trouble. Patrick now, arm and leg weary, is being tumbled around by Burns. Burns comes in, misses with a left, a hard right to the chin by Burns, and a hard left up to the side of the head by Patrick. They struggle away in the clinch now, both boys very tight on it, with Burns being met by Patrick with a hard right and left to the face, a straight right by Patrick, but a sizzling right to the chin by Burns, and there's a left to the side of
Patrick recovered, and by the 8th round, he started to close in. By the 9th, Burns was weakening. Patrick was back in charge. There was no stopping him.
Oh, and this looks like the end. Patrick is going for the kill.
More big punches to Burns' handsome head saw him sink to the canvas.
But his fighting instinct gets him to his knee. But the fight's over. He can't make it, and Burns is out. Patrick is still champion.
Vic Patrick had won the most eagerly awaited Australian fight in years. There were stories